Now, to formally start the session, I would like to recognize His Excellency, the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Mr. Chungong, honor members of Parliamentary Union that are joined, colleagues that are also part of the platform this afternoon. Let me welcome you to this session discussing the impact of COVID-19 on SDG implementation in Africa and the role of parliamentarians. The session is jointly organized by the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. COVID, as all of us has come to know, has shown us how weak our systems are and how vulnerable we are as citizens of the world. It has proven that we do not have answers to everything and we need each other. We are one. It has shown how crucial it is to have policy and legislation ensuring preparedness and intervention for certain situations such as the COVID that we're experiencing at the moment. In Africa, over 60% of the socio-economic activities are weather and climate sensitive and heavily dependent on natural resources. COVID-19 pandemic and the climate change crisis has exposed vulnerabilities and structural inequalities of African economies and communities. It has actually created new economic pressures on our countries. At ECA, we have estimated that GDP growth of 3.2% of Africa prior to the pandemic, which could actually contract as much as 2.7%. The socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are uncovering asymmetries and structural imbalances in our societies, such as the prevalence of poverty, unequal access to health services, weak healthcare systems, high unemployment rates, persistent inequalities such as equitable education, and weak regional and global cooperation. On SDGs, we are not doing well. Africa is not on track, and the current rate of progress is insufficient to achieve all the goals by 2030. Something must be done to deliver both on Agenda 2030 as well as the Agenda 2063. The exposure of systems by the pandemic has not spared statistical systems either. Data collections operations have significantly affected. In some cases, about 25% of the surveys actually that we planned this year have actually been suspended or halted altogether. The national statistical systems requires re-engineering, what I would call statistical system re-engineering to modernize into digitalized systems. Africa does not have the fiscal space either for the $1 trillion stimulus packages as it attempts to build back better, but must instead look for innovative alternatives. The African Continental Free Trade Area is one such solution. By addressing Africa's tariffs and non-tariff barriers and harmonizing regulatory and standards of differentials, the FCTA could help to consolidate a $2.5 trillion market and generate an estimated 5.6 million jobs. This meeting we're having this afternoon of parliamentarians provides an opportunity to reflect on some of these issues. Parliaments help to ensure that the appropriate recovery strategies are put in place to be able to meet the SDGs and the aspirations of Agenda 2063, including ensuring adequate budgets and formulation of appropriate policies so that no one is left behind. During this webinar, we will hear about the national experiences of SDGs implementation in the light of COVID, the status of SDG implementation in Africa, and prospects of the future with respect to building better back, with respect to building back better and leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area. Without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency the Honorable Mr. Martin Chungong, the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, to deliver his opening remarks. The Secretary General, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for giving me the floor. Honorable speakers of Parliament present at this event, honorable members of Parliament, distinguished colleagues of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this very important event on how parliaments position themselves in addressing the challenges of COVID-19 and its aftermath. It is a real pleasure for me and the Inter-Parliamentary Union to partner with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in organizing this conversation with eminent members of Parliament from across Africa. Indeed, the current health crisis has been an unprecedented wake-up call for all of us, and it is showing how crucial it is for countries to have policy and legislation ensuring preparedness and prevention. Mr. Moderator, you have just indicated some of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has uncovered stark asymmetries and structural imbalances in our societies. We have the prevalence of poverty that is being uncovered. And of course, there's unequal access to health services. You have also referred to the paucity of global cooperation in the COVID response. And basically, the crisis has again laid bare the persisting inequalities of income as well as access to public goods and fundamental human rights. And we are all agreed that the pandemic has been hampering the implementation of the SDGs, pushing critical development targets beyond reach and hitting the most vulnerable and marginalized segments of the populations the hardest, not only in terms of vulnerability to the crisis, but also from the economic point of view. To contain the spread of the pandemic, alleviate its effects, and ensure that no major crisis will follow at the economic, social, and environmental levels, it is crucial that countries implement well-directed and well-resourced responses that are inclusive, forward-looking, and aligned with the SDGs. The impact of COVID-19 will unfortunately be long-lasting. That is why structural responses based on the SDGs framework are badly needed today. In the IPU's view, the global goals are more relevant today than ever before. The world is facing a number of challenges that can only be solved through common global solutions that the SDG framework readily offers. The SDGs provide a roadmap that can help countries improve their preparedness, respond to the pandemic, and implement recovery plans that deliver social and environmental sustainability. Their strength also lies in their recognition that the issues affecting sustainable development are interrelated and should therefore be considered in a holistic way. Parliaments must play a central role in this effort. Their legislative, oversight, and budget responsibilities make them key players in, for example, improving the health coverage of the people they represent, combating inequalities, and building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. I would like to stress the critical role that parliaments and parliamentarians have in holding governments accountable for how resources, including aid, are spent. Achieving the SDGs will require an increase in the quantity and quality of resources available, effective spending, as well as stronger development partnerships. To strengthen the role of parliaments in this area, the IPU and the United Nations Development Programme have recently published a set of guidelines for enhancing engagement and contribution of parliaments to effective development cooperation. These guidelines provide an overview of the main elements of effective development cooperation and identify concrete ways in which parliamentarians can ensure resources and partnerships are used in the most effective way possible. Another way in which parliaments can exercise their oversight function with regard to the SDGs is through participation in the voluntary national reviews, whose findings countries present to the United Nations High-Level Forum for Political, High-Level Political Forum. The survey the IPU conducted this year indicates that some 58% of parliaments from the countries presenting the reports engaged and contributed in some way to the process. This represents a significant improvement from the 2019 finding of 38%. We at the IPU hope that this figure will continue to grow and that this involvement of parliaments will result in improved oversight and better outcomes for the people. I am very pleased that I am speaking today in the presence of some distinguished and high-level parliamentarians across the African continent, and I do hope that my appeal will not fall on deaf ears. As countries are now resetting their priorities and reallocating resources to deal with the pandemic, parliaments should be in a position to influence policies and budgets to ensure that the COVID-19 pandemic responses and recovery strategies incorporate the SDG framework in its entirety. Parliaments should monitor policy implementation and ensure that the needs and concerns of the whole of society are given due consideration, with no one being left behind. Parliaments should be at the heart of the national and global response to COVID-19, and they should also be at the heart of transformational change. Going back to business as usual cannot be an option. During this webinar, you will acquire up-to-date information on the status of the SDG implementation, as well as recommendations to accelerate transformation or transformative change in Africa. You'll have a unique opportunity to exchange views and share experiences, as well as identify common strategies to integrate the SDGs in the work of your parliaments, and to scale up the resources for and political commitment to regional cooperation. It is my hope that you will take advantage of this opportunity to come up with recommendations and conclusions that will be beneficial to your parliaments and the region as a whole. I look forward to open and constructive discussions and wish all of you a most successful webinar. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, SDG, for those very, very insightful remarks, emphasizing on the importance of this gathering this afternoon. In particular, I think you touched on the issues of how countries should actually make sure that they implement the SDGs and ensuring that it informs not just the SDG, but also the Agenda 2063, which all of us on the continent aspire. But also you emphasized on the role of parliamentarians, and I think those honorable members of parliament that are connected, I think they really take from what you have said in terms of ensuring that there is right allocation of resources, both in terms of quantity and quality, and also to provide the insightful and the role that they need to play in the national voluntary reviews. So without further ado, I would now like to ask Mr. Bartholomew to also deliver the speech on behalf of the Executive Secretary of ECA. Bart, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Bartholomew Ama. I'm the Director of the Macroeconomics and Governance Division in ECA, and I'm delivering this speech on behalf of the Executive Secretary who, for unforeseen circumstances, could not make this event. She extends her greetings. Mr. Martin Chongong, Secretary General, Inter-Parliamentary Union. Honorable Mr. Issa Mado Jabir, Chair of the Standing Committee on Sustainable Development, National Assembly of Chad. Honorable Ms. Veronica Titi Uzenda, Senator, Parliament of Zimbabwe and President of the IPU Committee on Sustainable Development. Honorable Members of Parliament, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome all of you to this webinar and very happy that we are all collaborating with IPU on this important meeting with such an austere group, such as parliamentarians. This time last year, Africa was beginning to show progress on economic growth rates, with some gains in health outcomes, fewer women and children dying in childbirth or due to diseases, improvements in access to education and electricity, and a dramatic rise in internet connectivity. These trends, distinguished guests, augured well for progress in the implementation of the SDGs and were reinforced by the World Bank's forecast of a growth pickup to 3.9% in 2020 and 4.1% in 2021 for Africa. However, the pandemic is poised to halt and reverse the development gains made over the past decade by African countries, with potentially devastating socioeconomic impacts, which will be felt for years to come, if not effectively managed. ECA estimates show that GDP could contract between 1.8% and 5.4% in 2020. This is equivalent to an 8.6 percentage point decline from the projection made prior to the pandemic. As it stands, the absolute number of poor people has been increasing since 1990 due to high population growth and a slow rate of decline in poverty. ECA estimates that about 100 million more people will be added to the ranks of the poor in 2020. Inequalities in general, and gender inequalities in particular, are likely to be further exacerbated by the pandemic. With low levels of skills, few job opportunities, and limited access to high quality and digital education, young people in Africa represent the population most vulnerable to the adverse economic impacts of the pandemic. Indeed, ECA estimates that Africa loses $79 billion a year when young people are not in school. It is clear that the twin crises, that is health and economic, will have a big impact on African countries' ability to implement the SDGs. With 27 of the world's 28 poorest countries being African, the SDGs matter most for the African continent. The core of the decade of action by the UN Secretary General to significantly accelerate action to deliver on the SDGs by 2030 is therefore more urgent than ever. By working together in solidarity and leveraging regionalism, we can get back on track. Initiatives being undertaken by the ECA and its partners to help Africa contain the effects of the crisis have included, particularly in the area of health, working with African ministers of finance to support countries with an economic stimulus package that includes several initiatives to provide capital and liquidity to governments, from the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative and sovereign debt restructuring. I'm sure you're aware that several of your countries have actually participated in the DSSI. Providing solid analysis of socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 and policy responses. Integrating the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 into country-level frameworks and responses. Leveraging technology to assist African countries in the fight against the pandemic. In this context, the Africa Communication and Information Platform for Health and Economic Action, ACIP, is a mobile-based tool that furnishes national and regional COVID task forces with user-generated survey data and actionable health and economic insights to enable them better analyze pandemic-related problems and implement appropriate responses. Other activities include strengthening Africa's data ecosystem in the face of COVID-19, collaborating on establishing the Africa Medical Supplies Platform, piloting an AFCFTA-anchored pharma initiative to develop the capacity of African countries to ease the burden on their health systems through localized production of medicines, pooled procurement, and a harmonized regulatory framework. Supporting a planning of Africa's recovery to build back better, taking into account the need for a green recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, parliamentarians play a central and integral role in this endeavor by ensuring that the stimulus packages that will be adopted are people-centered. And several countries have adopted similar stimulus packages. We just need to make sure that the beneficiaries actually receive these packages. That the national and regional plans advanced for the SDGs are budgeted for, and these resources are allocated. Governments are also need to be held accountable with the keen eye of parliamentarians to ensure that their national, continental, and global commitments are met. And parliamentarians must also ensure that countries are put on a sustainable pathway for recovery, leaving no one behind. Indeed, parliamentarians can be powerful agents of change. It is by ratifying international agreements, translating the SDGs into action-oriented national programs that respond to country-specific development priorities, monitoring their implementation, and ensuring government is accountable to the people for national progress on the SDGs, that parliamentarians can drive the change that is needed. What will be ultimately required of parliamentarians is ensuring that policies are put in place to post-COVID to support economies in ensuring that AFCFTA takes off, which will ultimately lead to the implementation of the SDGs. What we do know is that Africa does not have the fiscal space for trillion-dollar stimulus packages as it attempts to build back better, but must instead look for innovative alternatives. The good news is that we have those opportunities in our reach. They include leveraging the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as Africa's stimulus vehicle that will consolidate, could generate around 5.6 million jobs as we build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. Bring down borrowing, boost intra-Africa trade and exports that will ensure, among other things, access to staple foods and essential medical supplies, capitalize on deeper and stronger intra-Africa cross-border ties and trade relations so that we can work with each other in a more effective way, and prioritizing a green recovery pathway, resilient energy and infrastructure, climate-smart food production, nature-based solutions, and green value chains that Africa can respond quickly and build long-term resilience. We will be hearing more about these opportunities in the course of this webinar. And I also look forward to the exchange of national experiences in implementing the SDGs in the light of COVID-19. ECA stands ready to provide its support to the IPU and Africa's member states. We remain committed to rebuilding a stronger, inclusive, and more resilient Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart, for those remarks, very clearly calling on the parliamentarians to take certain actions, but also you emphasized really the impact of COVID on the social and economic sectors on the continent. You also emphasized the core of the Secretary General in implementing the SDGs, and more importantly, also the work that you emphasized on the initiative of ECA working with partners to try and address some of these issues on COVID. But you also mentioned about the role of parliamentarians that being real the change makers. In other words, they're the change tools that will actually make things happen. So we're hoping that out of this meeting, and as they go back, the parliamentarians will begin to pick up some of these issues that both yourself and the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union was emphasized. So we'll go now next to our presenter, who is also going to provide remarks. I'll call upon Mr. Issa Mado Jibe, the Chair of the Standing Committee on Sustainable Development of the National Assembly of Chad. Mr. Jibe, please. Do we have Mr. Jibe connected with us? Could you kindly please unmute yourself and request to speak, the blue button at the bottom of the right hand side of your laptop. Okay, well, with that, it looks like Mr. Jibe will have to speak at another opportune time. I'm going to ask a colleague from the Africa Center of Statistics, Mr. Joseph Ubudo, to give his presentation. He will be talking to the issues of the SDGs.
Oui.
Oh, do we have Mr.
Can you hear me?
Hello? I think there's been a slight change, a modification in the program. I'm going to ask Miss Bosede Olinika to give a presentation on the implementation together with Joseph. And then Mr. Bader will come later to speak. Joseph, please, could you go ahead and make the presentation? Mr. Bader will speak after you.
Okay. So thank you very much, moderator.
Mr. Jaber, can you mute your mic, please? Mosula Jaber, can you mute your mic, please?
I hope you can hear me.
Go ahead.
Moderator and honorable members of parliament. My name is Joseph Timfisi Ilbudo, Chief of the Statistical Development, Data Innovation and Outreach section of the African Center for Statistics. I'm presenting on behalf of two divisions, our divisions and macroeconomics and governance division, on two key issues, on SDGs implementations and also zooming on the specific cases. Track as Africa on implementing the SDGs. And when we look at the set of results we have, the evidences that we have so far, then the question is very pertinent. We have take stock of 2019 result while moving, and as you have seen, COVID have came and complicate the situation. But when we already look at what we have achieved in 2019, Africa is on track on one goal, goal 14, that is related to life below water, but with only one indicators that are recorded there. The region cannot achieve any of the other SDGs with the current pace. Something needs to be done. The continent has made relatively good progress on SDG 10, which is related to reduce inequality. Progress is very slow or stagnant on other goals, and the region is not even moving in the right direction for peace, justice, and strong institutions. Overall, data availability is weak. The screen, related, for example, to gender inequality, just to cite few, reducing inequality, and climate actions. And you have the list. Then we're asking ourselves, where will Africa be in 2030? Based on the data that we have from our member states. Honorable members of parliament, out of 169 SDG target, Africa is likely to meet 9 at the current progress rate. So there is really a concern. And when we look at our screen, these 9 are distributed fewer, and more preoccupation is on some goals where really the issue of data and issue of progress is at stake. And as we are moving, we mentioned that COVID has come and impacted on issues related to data. ECA has made an assessment of the COVID-19 impact on national statistical system. And we find out earlier in April that data collection operations have been significantly affected. And as the moderator mentioned, to some point, 25% of surveys planned have been altered or suspended. And where the collection is ongoing, we have a higher response of a higher rate of non-response, and also sample coverage issued due to observance of distances. Besides this, we could say that there would be an impact on the data availability. So something needs to be done to correct the trajectory of how the continent is moving toward 2030 when we look at the evidences that we have. And we zero into a sub-regional breakdown of ECA 5 sub-regions. And as you can see here, the data availability is still an issue where we have even one entire goal without data, that is the climate actions. And when you go down to target level, you have almost 40% of the targets that do have data. And when you go to indicators levels at more disaggregated, you only reach 35%. And when you look at the progress in the sub-regions, you will see the green light, very few, and the yellow, that is concentrating on most of the slow and stagnant issues, and then the red that is showing regressions. And details is given, and maybe on the discussion we can come back to that. And let me zoom into 2 specific cases that our colleagues from Macroeconomic and Governance Division have prepared. And thank you to Bosade for putting everything together in that presentation. Zeroing in on SDG 4, that is related to quality education, and SDG 8 related to decent work and economic growth. What do we discover there in Africa? We conclude to some sort of unfavorable performance in education. Honorable members, low completion rate at primary and lower secondary school level is observed. Substantial drop in the minimum proficiency level in mathematics and reading for grade 2 and 3 is recorded. Reduction in gross enrollment ratio in earlier childhood education is pointed out here. The gross enrollment ratio in primary school failed between 2014 and 2018, and the trend may continue. And globally, 24% of enrolled students in Africa were out of school due to COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a result that we have in conjunction with UNESCO, that is the custodian agency for education data. So when we still be in the education ground, we have a limited education infrastructure in Africa. Access to electricity, internet, and computer fell in 2018 compared to 2014. And the proportion of schools that had access to electricity was the lowest at all levels of schools in Africa. The proportion of schools that had access to electricity was the lowest at the all level in Africa as compared to other regions in 2018. And moving to decent work and economic growth, we record this. Many African youth could only find employment in informal sector. Many youth leave school earlier in Africa. The proportion of youth not in education, employment, and training is increasing in Africa. Unemployment rate continue to rise. Many people in the informal economy are in danger of losing means of living. More than 1 in 6 youth people have lost their job. And before I conclude, I would like to do this appeal. Honorable members, the pandemic COVID-19 have taken us to a non-questionable conclusion that we need to modernize and transform our statistical system that are the base for evidence decisions. And in that case, it will be necessary for statistical system to revisit the Statistical Act and legislations, and we need your support for that. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Joseph, emphasizing on the issues of the status of SDGs on the continent, which certainly require a lot of attention. I think the SG also did mention, I think, the role of the parliamentarians. I think we'll be counting on them to make sure that adequate resources are actually put aside to support the implementation of Agenda 2063. So I will now move to the next speaker, and I'm afraid we're already running out of time. I will ask Miss Veronica Msisi Mzenda, the Senator and Parliament of Zimbabwe, and the President of the IPU Committee on Sustainable Development. Ms. Mzenda, please. Please go ahead with your presentation, Ms. Mzenda. Ms. Mzenda, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your presentation. She's probably having challenges. Do we have Mr. Issa Jaber, the chair of the Standing Committee of Chad?
Good afternoon.
Je suis là.
Okay.
Merci à vous. Merci à vous.
Oui. Let's have Ms. Mzenda to continue, please. Ms. Mzenda, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, the Secretary General. Good afternoon, the moderator and all colleagues. I'm presenting the situation in Zimbabwe and what is also being done with Parliament. The restriction of economic and social activity has meant that COVID-19 has become a systematic development crisis in Africa, hence a threat to the realization of the SDGs. For a nation to ensure implementation of SDGs by 2030, there is need for prioritization at the highest level and mainstreaming into national development plans, hence the importance of Parliament's involvement. The Parliament of Zimbabwe is faced with a myriad of challenges to tackle in its COVID-19 response agenda. SDGs 1, 2, 8, and 10. Majority of people in Zimbabwe earn their livelihoods through the informal economy with little insurance against unexpected disruptions. At the same time, many formal businesses, especially small businesses, are running out of reserves to sustain themselves. This then results in GDP drops, trade balance worsens, job and livelihood losses, wealth depletes, domestic supply chains collapse, economic activity stalls, increased non-informal activity, recession, debt crisis, and financial distress. SDG 3, reduced household incomes against a backdrop of weak health insurance and social protection schemes greatly affected the capacity of people to expand on health services. Healthcare facilities, infrastructure, and service delivery capacities were overstretched, and many patients failed to get professional help as they would be turned back. There was also psychological stress noticed. SDG 4, prolonged school closures at all levels left learners of all levels and teachers unable to learn or teach from home. Majority of secondary and primary students do not have access to household or personal computers, internet, and electricity. SDG 5, disease control measures adopted by the state directly impacted on the social fabric. Spending reduced, disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups, human development losses, widespread deprivation, social disaffection, breakdown in social services, increased inequalities, and vulnerable groups victimized. For example, 60% surge in domestic violence and sexual and gender-based violence recorded. The Parliament of Zimbabwe made proactive strides in trying to contain the pandemic. On March 17, 2020, the government declared a national disaster. And going further, also on 30 March 2020, the state began a nationwide lockdown because it was not looking very good. Parliament was classified as an essential service that should continue with its key roles during national lockdown. Selected Parliament actions. The Parliament of Zimbabwe is an SDG-allied institution with a special dedicated thematic committees and also committee chairpersons. Committees and individual members of parliaments have been very active in tackling the pandemic and bringing forth critical SDG-related issues. Reviewed and passed more than 30 statutory instruments, SIAs, on COVID-19 management. Some SIAs were relief regulations to protect citizens from degenerating into poverty, e.g. renters exemption. That's referring really to SDG 1. Committee finding tours on health care institutions, quarantine centers, and ports of entry were visited by parliamentarians. About 2 weeks ago, Parliament engaged in public visitation across the country on a petition seeking to leave no one behind through removing age restriction. Constitutional Amendment number 2 debate. Much lobbying was done by parliamentarians in order really to look at this pandemic. Committee oversight visits were made to CSOs and also SGBV, one-stop centers, and safe houses across the country. This again emphasizing SDG number 5. Individual MPs took turns every week to pose certain questions to ministers in the plenary on health, education, economy, safety nets, urban clean water availability, energy, peace, and justice, SDGs 1 to 8, 10, and 11. Selected Parliament actions.
Mr. Mzenda, if you could just speed up your presentation, we are running out of time. Thank you. Please proceed. Ms. Mzenda, we're running out of time. Thank you.
Okay. Let me go to the conclusion. On the upside, there's some indication that COVID-19 may accelerate technology adoption and the transition to a digital economy and even facilitate a degree of leapfrogging towards a more sustainable economy fueled by renewable energy. Global and inter-country and non-governmental partner collaborations in trade and disaster preparedness could have been also enhanced during COVID, and platforms said may offer a strong building block for SDG 17, which is on partnership for the goal. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mzenda, for taking us through some of the work that you're doing in Zimbabwe, which is really remarkable and commendable work. I will now call upon the chair of the Standing Committee on Sustainable Development from the National Assembly of Chad, Mr. Jabaya, please.
Well, thank you very much. Please allow me to first and foremost thank and commend the organizers of this online gathering. Organizers from the Inter-Parliamentary Union and from ECA. I wish to state that this is a commendable initiative. This allows us to address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to the implementation of SDGs. because the pandemic has some impact on the implementation of SDGs, especially in Chad. It is following the 4th global meeting of the parliaments, which held in August under the theme enabling democracy to serve peace and sustainable development, building a world for the people. The Speaker of the National Assembly of Chad committed before his peers to oversee the implementation of SDGs in Chad. During the plenary of the 10th June 2016, the National Assembly deliberated and adopted the resolution which established the Standing Committee on the Implementation of SDGs, which later became a permanent commission and led to the workshop on the assessment of the implementation of SDGs, which was held in December 2018 with the support of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. This commission works in close collaboration with the government and partners to ensure a better monitoring of the various strides made in the implementation of SDGs. That commission comprises 21 members from various political groups represented in the National Assembly and has a bureau which counts 7 members. As part of the response to the health crisis, you know, the Chadian Parliament played a key role in the oversight of measures adopted by the government and the adoption of the legal instruments to face the crisis through budgeting at the National Assembly in order to meet the cries of the people and support the government in promulgating the state of emergency. But we equally helped through the oversight of social measures taken by the government. So the parliamentarians took measures which enabled the various stakeholders to take part in the plenary sessions. So the National Assembly, like other parliaments, supports the instauration of the state of emergency, adopted its promulgation, oversees its implementation, assess its socio-economic and environmental impact, and constantly calls on the government to account for their actions and provide information to parliamentarians, but also to the general public on the efforts that are put in place against COVID-19 and to meet the needs of the people. So we must understand that today people are more concerned by the quest of solutions against the pandemic. Let's not forget that the planet is also facing environmental challenges, especially challenges due to climate change. We can take the case of Chad today, but let's focus on the city of N'Djamena, which has been under floods, which are detrimental to our population. Against this backdrop, the National Assembly, through the committee in charge of monitoring the implementation of SDG, which I head, is conducting the oversight of the implementation of the targets of SDGs on the field. The key activities or the key SDGs we focus on as SDG 3 and 6, which are debated upon and tabled to the National Assembly for budgeting. You know that we are facing various challenges linked to the pandemic of COVID-19, which has slowed down the activities of our government, but also its partners, and which has a negative impact on our activities. So there lies a problem involving communication with our people, because the measures, distanciation measures, do not allow us to take these measures. That puts us in a place where communication is impeded. So we need now to rethink our approach in order to conduct our activities while respecting the various barrier measures. So we suggest that the inclusion of SDG or integration of SDG in the budgeting of the state become a reality, especially 1, 2, and 5. That is one of the key imperatives of my commission today. You know, these are some of the most important aspects which can impede the work of the committee on the field. Such include the problem of funding, because our partners today cannot conduct their activities since they can't work fully, but also due to some of the barrier measures, we can't put together people in order to discuss and to carry out activities with a great number of people due to social distancing. So that is one of the challenges at the level of our committee, which do not allow us to achieve the SDGs 1, 3, and 6, among others. That's what I wanted to say. And to conclude, I exhort parliamentarians to support their government in their endeavor to recover from the COVID-19 by mainstreaming SDGs against the background of this crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency from the National Assembly of Chad. I think we've heard quite a number of things that have been said so far from the Secretary General, from the Executive Secretary of ECA, the presentation that was made by ECA on SDGs and how poor we are in terms of implementing the SDGs. And also we heard about what's going on in Zimbabwe, the work that they're doing there. And finally, we've just heard from Chad and some of the constraints that the committee is facing. We sort of are constrained with time, but I think we have 15 to 20 minutes to have an interactive discussion on the goals, on the implementation in light of COVID. So let's reflect on the presentations, and I'll now open the floor for discussion before we proceed to the next presentation. The floor is open, please. If you want to speak, please just request to speak, a blue button at the left bottom of your laptop, and we'll be able to give you the opportunity to be able to make your intervention. And of course, I'll ask the Kensha to also help me identify those that would like to speak. Perhaps while we are waiting for people to intervene and ask questions, I do have a question that perhaps could be asked by those that made the presentations a little earlier. I am going to ask the question, which could be either answered by any of those that made the presentation, either the SG himself or even other members that are there. From what has been discussed, what would be the impact of COVID on this regional and sub-regional SDG progress assessment? Anyone who would like to answer that question while we're waiting for others to come in, please? I'm basically asking about what would be the impact of COVID on the regional and sub-regional SDG progress, given what we have heard in terms of our implementation of SDGs. Ms. Mzenda or Mr. Debe or the SG may want to take that question, and including even colleagues that presented from ECA.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes, very briefly, please. Go ahead very briefly, Joseph.
Oui, merci madame. Quand je prends le cas.
Thank you very much. I wish to speak on Chad. You know that we redirected our project. We focused on health, setting aside other sectors. I believe that post-COVID-19, we must reflect on how to put in place adequate funding, taking into account other sectors to create wealth and enable the general public to go back to their daily activities, because today with the various barrier measures, many activities have been slowed down. So we need, in my opinion, to support other sectors. We must not neglect the health sectors, but we must also focus on other sectors in order to boost the economy, in order to attempt to create wealth, and also enable various sector projects to take the rise it needs. That is what we are attempting to do at the SDG committee in order to support the government in this regard, while ensuring that budget is also allocated to various sectors so that no other sector be left behind. We must not only prioritize health and security, because as you know, in Chad now today, security is the recipient of a great number of funding. That is what we are going to do in order to help the government in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Burundi, for that response, or that Chad rather. I'm going to ask Burundi to come in at this stage. The Honorable Member of Parliament from Burundi, please. And I'll prepare the Honorable Member of Parliament from Botswana to be the next. Burundi,
merci pour la parole. Au niveau du Burundi, dans le cadre du développement.
Thank you for giving me the floor in Burundi within the framework of economic development in order to respond to, in order to meet the SDGs. Against the backdrop of SDG, the government has established a National Development Plan, which runs from 2018 to 2027, which aligns perfectly with SDGs and Agenda 2030, as well as the aspirations of Agenda 2063. Our National Development Plan includes a certain number of priorities. Based on the social aspects, which includes the health of our population, development activities. We have observed that with the COVID-19 pandemic, much effort have been made, but we know that in order to effectively and effectuously combat COVID-19, there is need for international cooperation. So each of us, by focusing specifically on containing the propagation, we can bring people to work and to produce. And that is why in Burundi, fortunately, we have a low level of prevalence thanks to the barrier measures. At the National Assembly, which is one of the houses of the Parliament, through the Economic Commission, we are conducting assessments of the status of the implementation of a strategy to combat COVID-19. These assessments are conducted by permanent commissions, both at the Parliament and at the Senate. During the various sittings, we invite the Minister of Health, who is in charge of the response against COVID-19, and he's called on to present the status. And within the framework of the last assessment, which was held a month ago, it was observed that COVID-19 has significantly been contained in the country. We seize that opportunity to call on the government to prepare activities for recovery, for economic recovery, because the past 3 months that we have just spent in a sort of forced limbo due to COVID-19 has led to the allocation of resources being directed mostly towards the COVID-19 response. And we believe that with this reduction of the number of cases, we can now ask that the budget for the government be increased. The Burundian government and parliament are still concerned by the various embargoes by the European Union, which impedes its collaboration on the international front and its fight against COVID-19 and the implementation of SDGs. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member from Burundi. I would like to ask, as the last intervention in this segment, the Member of Parliament from Botswana. Botswana, please come in.
I think so. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? The moderator, you call from a member of parliament from Botswana, and I wonder whether you are mistaken Namibia from Botswana.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Botswana, but Professor, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this important networking. I simply want to make some few comments. Namibia's commitment is reflected in the processes that has taken place to ensure the full integration of sustainable developments into national development plans, namely the 5th National Development Plan. The NDP 5 is informed by the long-term national development framework for Namibia, which is known as Vision 2030. NDP 5 plan focuses on economic progression, social transformation, environmental sustainability, and good governance, which talks to the SDGs pillars. We also, as a parliament, have developed and aiming at further strengthening of monitoring and evaluation processes at national level in order to ensure harmonized reporting and accountability of the implementation of sustainable development goals. A number of speakers now and before has spoken about the impact of the pandemic, the invisible enemy that is inflicted damages in a number of countries around the globe. Pandemic has put tremendous pressure across the board in the implementation of sustainable development goals. The oversight role by Parliament is equally affected in the same way. And in Namibia, we are basically looking at ways and means of further strengthening the role of Parliament in terms of our oversight responsibility. One of the ideas that we are pursuing is to ensure that we add another dimension to whatever we have done in the past, and that is to have chairpersons of our various parliamentary committees to constitute a kind of a forum at which they come together to inform themselves on how well are we doing with respect to the implementation of development goals. That is an idea that we are going to pursue. I am also prepared to admit the fact that after the elections, it has taken us quite a while to constitute our standing committees formally. That job has been done now, and we're very much looking forward to active engagement of our various standing committees in playing their part with respect to the sustainable development goals. Chairperson Namibia commits herself to the complete development of national indicators framework. That is the role, how important it is in terms of data collection and to analyze the data to make sure that we are properly informed. This is a challenge in many of our developing countries, but it's something that is absolutely essential that we get the information accurately as possible. It is also worth noting that the pandemic has not been the only challenge in terms of the development in Namibia. Namibia has experienced in recent years, the country has gone through severe drought in various parts of the country, while other parts have experienced floods causing waterborne diseases. It is something that we have to confront almost year by year, and it's an issue that enjoys a particular attention, not at the government level alone, but by Parliament as well. COVID-19 pandemic has increased pressure and deepened the challenges a great deal. And it's something that is not only affecting the livelihood of people, but it is actually hindering the economic and social development of the country. These are equally issues that we share a great deal with other parts of the world. Namibia remains committed to the need to develop a resilient mechanism as far as the implementation of SDGs, and will continue to invest resources in order to ensure that these resources are targeted and set for specific goals in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. Domestic resources, and we are also very much interested in campaigning actively to increase the spirit of the global partnership for sustainable development goals as embedded in goal number 17. International support continue to be mobilized in order to ensure effective implementation of national developmental programs that will ensure sustainable development goals are actually achieved and become a reality. These are the few comments, Chair, that I wanted to put on the table by way of sharing particular experiences of Namibia, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly of Namibia, Professor Peter Kavijiji. We really appreciate sharing with us with the experience. We have now concluded that session we had earlier on, but please, if you do have questions, look at the chart on the left side of the, on the right side of the screen, and put your comments or question that you'd like to ask there so that they can be addressed. We now move to the last segment where we have a presentation that is going to focus on the prospects for the future and building back, which will be presented by my two colleagues, starting by David Luke. David Luke, please, could you give us your presentation? David, go ahead, please, to unmute yourself and put the presentation. In the meantime, I'm encouraging those that have questions, interventions, or even other members of parliament that would like to share their experience. You can put in brief bullet points in the chat box so that we can have a much more consolidated and informative report on the experiences, on how you're dealing and issues of COVID and how you're addressing them to ensure that we are able to attain the SDGs as well as the aspirations of Agenda 2063. David, please, could you put you on your screen and begin to speak to it, please? I suspect my colleagues are probably disconnected, but could you please, Emmanuel or Frank, please request to speak? I do see Frank on the screen. I think the order of the presentation was going to be David and then Frank Lutibigwa, but maybe while we are waiting for David to make the presentation, can we go ahead with Frank? Frank, can you go ahead with your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Your presentation was on the screen and disappeared somehow.
Yeah, I wanted to go to the screen.
Okay. It's coming now. It's coming now. Thank you. It's there. Just put on the full screen, please. Thank you. We can see your presentation, Frank.
Can see, but I can't go to full screen. But if you can see that should be okay, probably.
Okay. Yes, please.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
All right.
Can you go back out and start sharing the presentation again?
Okay. See, it's not going full screen.
Please just go ahead in the interest of time. Please go ahead. We'll be able to just speak to the presentation. Thank you.
But you'll not be able to see the second slide. It is not moving either.
Frank, I suggest you just go ahead and speak to the slides, even if we don't see all of them. Oh, good.
Okay, great.
Good.
I hope you can see it now.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members of Parliament, dear colleagues. I'll be presenting the inclusive green recovery post-COVID, and I'll be associating my presentation that linkage between COVID-19 and climate change. These are two important factors that affect Africans' development path. COVID-19 came about when they were already on top of existential threat of climate change to African development. Therefore, building better post-COVID requires that governments take long-term development strategies that focus on low carbon climate resilient development pathways in order to achieve the 2030 agenda and the Agenda 2063. In doing so, we suggest that these strategies should be powered by continent's abundant clean energy sources in order to bring multiple wins of society, economies, and the environment. If this is done, it will create jobs, enhance trade, contribute to global climate action, and address chronic energy access deficits. It will further strengthen the ability of countries to deal with other shocks that will come, ensuring that hospitals, schools, industries have energy that's sufficient to keep essential services and supplies running. Therefore, as we all know, climate change has been impacting African economies in many ways because of extreme events, so floods and drought, and simply because African economies are essentially reliant heavily on natural resources and climate-sensitive sectors, which make Africa highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change, especially sub-Saharan Africa. As global temperatures continue to rise, the temperature will suppress productivity of workers exposed to extreme heat, reduce agricultural outputs, slow investments, and damage people's health. As we see from this table of scenarios of increasing temperatures ranging from 1 degree to 2 to 4 degrees relative to productive levels, the continent is predicted to affect the GDP, which will contract by 2.25% to 12.1%. And to the very regional way, with West, Central, and East Africa being most affected, more than Southern and Eastern Africa.
I'd like to give your number to those guys to call you. Yeah, but I now have access to the platform. So
please, David, can you mute your mic, please, David? Can you mute your mic? Frank is on the screen right now. Go ahead, Frank.
Thank you. So in this regard, to be able to avoid the calamities of increased temperatures and damages by climate change, we suggest that countries should not only focus on short-term packages to address issues of climate of COVID-19, but also factor in impacts of climate change. By doing so, they should be able to prioritize low carbon investment over high carbon intensive projects, such as green industrialization, green energy, smart agriculture, and nature-based solutions to address challenges of climate change. By doing so, we suggest that countries put in place microeconomic policies and incentives to drive green industrialization, leverage limited public sources to attract transformative private sector investments, build inclusion in the green industrialization agenda, build learning platforms for systemic greening, develop innovative financial instruments to mobilize resources for green industrialization, play a more decisive role in global governance and negotiation on trade and climate change, rapidly expand Africa's installed renewable energy capacity, which is currently at this small figure of 230,000 megawatts, and apply low carbon agricultural policy frameworks to make sure that the agricultural production is sustainable. And in conclusion, we suggest that in the short term to medium term, governments should invest in Africa's health capacity as a resilient factor, targeting 10% of national budgets, invest in energy and associated resilient infrastructure to allow interconnection enablers for SDGs to be put in place. And In the allocation of stimulus, they should be linked to SDGs indicators, should be timely disbursed for stimulus to ensure protection and maximize impact, prioritize concessional financing for stimulus, strengthen governance frameworks for disbursement. And in addition, empower youth and women to address climate change and its impacts, ensure finance and technology access and transfer, and also ensure that, or make sure that CFTA is expedited and implemented very quickly, invest in digital technologies and strengthen resilience infrastructure as a backbone. So, Mr. Chair, this is my short presentation because of the time we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, and really taking us through on some of the issues on climate change and their impact on economies, and also the recommendations that you are making going forward. Frank, if you, David, if you are on the screen now, could you please make your presentation? Yeah, yes, go ahead, David.
Yes, thank you very much. And my apologies for the technical glitch that we had that did not allow me to be able to join the platform. Honorable Secretary General of the IPU, honorable parliamentarians, colleagues, and I'd like to stand on all existing protocols. In the limited time available, what I'd like to do in this short presentation is just to highlight three metrics that underscore why the African Continental Free Trade Area is and should be part of building back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been highlighted by the moderator in his opening remarks in the statement on behalf of the Executive Secretary. And so I'd like to go straight to my first metric, which is just to show a problem that we have been faced with on this continent for a long time. This slide shows the problem that we have of Africa's overdependence on basic commodities. And what we have seen during this pandemic, especially during the period February, March, April, is that up to 67% of African exports, commodity exports, were affected by commodity price plummeting. Then also, as you can see from this slide, even though there's been a modest improvement in the last several months, Brent crude oil, which is the most important commodity export, is still down by 38%. The next metric I'd like to show is one that concerns our dependence on imported pharmaceuticals and food staples. And again, during this pandemic, what we have seen is that several of the countries that we depend on for these exports did put in place export restrictions. So just to give you an idea from this slide, when it comes to pharmaceuticals and medicinal products, up to 98% of what we consume is imported. When it comes to wheat and rice, it's close to 99%. So with this kind of dependency and where you have export restrictions, it does affect us on the continent. So this is why we all keep highlighting the importance of the AFCFTA, and this is my third and final matrix. And that is the research that we've done here at ECA shows that if the AFCFTA is fully implemented, we could expect to see intra-African exports increase, especially for industrial products. This is given the current trend where when we trade among ourselves, we tend to trade more value-added products than when we trade with the rest of the world, which is mainly commodities. So we'd see the industrial sector being impacted, depending, of course, on the ambition of the liberalization episode. But we also see significant increases in the key agricultural sector, as well as sectors that concern energy, metals, and so on. What some of us do believe that the greatest gain from the AFCFTA would be not so much in terms of reducing tariffs on goods, but also in disciplining the non-tariff barriers, areas such as the cost of transportation, the cost of freight and logistics, the inefficiencies at customs and customs processes. These areas, which we collectively refer to as trade facilitation, the trade facilitation sector, if we could make progress in these areas, we could see a tremendous boost to our ability to trade among ourselves. So this is what makes the AFCFTA exciting, because it addresses these issues, which we could also refer to as issues concerning trade governance. We organize ourselves on an institutional as well as policy basis to deal with these sorts of challenges. So in conclusion, in thinking about building back better, very clearly, the FCFTA is part of the equation and can help us, as was said in the opening remarks, to be able to engage and among ourselves to boost growth, because we cannot afford the kind of fiscal stimulus packages which we've seen in other countries. But certainly we could look at how we could boost trade among ourselves, and through that be able to boost growth. This, of course, also builds upon the previous intervention you heard from my colleague, Frank, who also talked about how building back better could impact our ability to fight climate change. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm aware that we do not have much time, and we've deliberately kept this intervention brief. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, David. Despite the short time that you were given, but you brought up very important issue around CFTA and its role in boosting economies on the continent, which links very well with the previous presentation that was made on climate change. We've now come to the conclusion of this particular segment, and I would like us now to go into an interactive discussion on building back better. We've heard quite a bit on issues of climate and recommendations that were made by the presenter there. And now the other bigger component is the role of CFTA in really building back and improving our economies going forward. And therefore want to open the floor at this stage. Please, anyone, any member of parliament that would like to make an interjection, please, this is the opportunity to. Do we have the Secretary General? If you are still on, you probably want to make some comments, because I think the two presenters that talked about CFTA and also climate change, I think they really raised very, very important points, issues that as members of parliament, you may want to go back to respective countries and make some of these things happen. You are the game changers, and CFTA too is a big changer in terms of really improving economies on the continent. So maybe, Secretary General, while we're waiting to hear from others, you may want to make a comment. Good. I'm told there is someone called the Secretary General, probably trying to unmute himself. There's a member of parliament called Dudu. I don't have the full names. I think it's Dudu Muroyoya. If you could just please request to speak and make your intervention. Honorable member, just unmute yourself. The button that is on your left, sorry, on your right at the bottom.
Thank you very much.
Please.
I'm Dudu Murora. I just wanted to come in at the first round where we were talking about the SDGs of what we specifically in Namibia doing. I think one good thing that we were trying to do here in Namibia is that we embarked upon an online education system, which in my opinion is a very good effort that has been started, regardless of the fact that not all the schools does have internet and not all learners also have access to computers. But nevertheless, I think it is a good thing, and it helped a lot of our learners to continue with our education. I think there is room, in my opinion, to improve on it, seeing that it will help that many times we would not as a government need to provide books, educational material for the children in the form of books. They can just be in the form of soft copies be provided to the learner. So I think it is something that we can really improve on. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dudu. Can I ask Honorable Princess Kasune Zulu, please, to come in? I think she's from Zambia. Princess Kasune Zulu, please come in.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Princess. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, this is Honorable Princess Kasune Zulu from Zambia, and thank you so much for the presentations. I wanted to ask Frank in particular, and anyone else can pick it up, whether what was being discussed has been also been deliberately exposed to the ministers and maybe the head of states, because my humble observation has been that there has been a reactive way of doing things, especially when it relates to climate change as well as now COVID. Given that the executives are the ones who make much of the decision depending on how your country runs or your parliament, you will find that as a member of parliament in your individual capacity may not do much, yet the information shared here is very critical. Could there be a deliberate way to engage them, whether it's on a webinar or in another forum, in particular the heads of state as well as their executives, and maybe different fields, so that we can have a quick and robust way of dealing with these things in a congruent manner without being reactive, but on a continuous, sustainable way? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kasune Zulu. My colleague, I'm sure, when they'll be given an opportunity to make a response to that. May I continue to ask Honorable Mando to also come in and ask a question or a comment? Honorable Mado. Yes, please, go ahead, Honorable. I think while we are waiting for the Honorable Madut, although I can see him on the screen, maybe just unmute yourself. There is a release button on your right bottom of the screen. Just ask to speak, request to speak, and they will allow you to come in, please. I'm also urging colleagues to look at the screen there. Perhaps there could be some questions there that you may want to speak to as well. Go ahead, please.
Oui. Voilà, pour dire que on a besoin vraiment que le renforcement.
What I want to say is that these committees need to be strengthened, and we need to know the members of these committees, so that we can contribute, strengthen our own participation along the lines of what we would like to see from our plans of action. This is important. Partners need to take this into account, because partners listening to us know fully well that MPs are close to population, and it is the MPs who speak on behalf of our population. So we need support, we need capacity building so that we can carry out our follow-up and monitoring mission on behalf of the people on the ground. This is an appeal, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mado here there. I have one more question from Honorable Nyozima from Burundi. He also wants to come in before we ask. Honorable from Burundi, please come in.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm the Secretary General of the Senate in Burundi. What I would like to say is, first of all, to congratulate presenters. I have just one question, and I'd like to direct this to the Honorable MP from Namibia, the Namibian Assembly. I would like to ask her whether they have a committee or a working group that monitors SDGs. If so, how do these committees or the committee work? I'd also like to know from the management if they have a monitoring and follow-up committee for SDGs, and if so, how do standing committees in the Namibian Parliament, for example, work with such a committee at the executive level? I'm speaking of the executive level, not management, but the executive level in Namibia. So my question again is, if you were to give any advice to assemblies that have not yet set up such monitoring committees, what would your advice be? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Namibia. The question that's being raised, Burundi, the question that's being raised to Namibia. I think we give an opportunity now to the speakers to react to some specific questions, but also maybe just make general comments on what has been said. So I will start with my colleague that is already on the screen, David. You probably want to make general comments and also maybe very specifically on some of the issues around CFTA.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, moderator. No, just very briefly to say to honorable parliamentarians that the projected impact of the AfCFTA on the continent is such that it is certainly an issue that parliamentarians would want to watch very closely. I would go so far to suggest that alongside, of course, SDG committees that are monitoring the impact of the SDGs, that perhaps the trade committee could be looking at this issue to make sure that each of your respective countries benefiting from the opportunities created by the AfCFTA in the enlarged African continental market. I think if parliamentarians are exercised on this issue, working closely with the executive branch of government as well on the implementation challenges, I think we will see a realization of the kind of impacts that I projected in one of the slides. So thank you very much, moderator, for this opportunity.
Oliver, your mic, please. Your mic is mute.
Thank you, David, for that. I was just going to ask that, Frank, please, if you could just come in and make some comments before I ask the Speaker of the National Assembly of Namibia or his representative to also respond to the question that was raised by Burundi. Frank, do you want to give some general comments around the issues of climate? And specifically, there was a question that came from Honorable Kasuna Zulu from Zambia, asking if we could extend this kind of discussion to heads of states, because the issues that you raise about climate changes and the degrees that are pertaining over a period of time if we don't do certain things could create devastating effects on the economies. Would you want to come in, Frank, on that, please? Okay, while we are waiting, can we get the Honorable Member or the Speaker of the National Assembly of Namibia to respond to the question raised by Member of Parliament from Zambia?
Hello, can you speak? Chair?
Yes, Frank, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. All I want to emphasize on the honorable members of Parliament about COVID and the climate change, that COVID had a very response from across the world, which was very swift, although it's still going on, but all governments have come together to really fight this pandemic. But this came on top of existential threat of climate change, which is slow in the process, but ultimately we have the same effect as COVID, or even worse, because it's affecting every sector of the economy, the livelihoods and well-being of people, and eventually our planet. So going forward in building back better, we would emphasize that all strategies which are taken should be not only be short-term, but also emphasize the need to address issues of climate change, as we all know that these are very serious impacts. And I'm sure Honorable Zulu from Zambia knows very well that recently, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and most of Southern Africa, there was a problem with the energy because of the drop in water levels of Kariba Dam. So this is well known. Now going to specifically to Honorable Zulu's question. Indeed, the governments and the heads of state are the ones who implement actions to address these issues. But also members of Parliament, as most of them have said, they are very close to people. They also address issues concerning livelihoods and people, and they bring the same people who do legislate, vote budgets for the government, and therefore, if they consider this as an important issue, it's very good. In terms of working, how we bring our proposals to heads of state, we go through the African Union. We work closely with the Commission of Rural Economy and Agriculture, and through the scientific technical committees, we also propose policies that can be brought to heads of state through the Council of Ministers. And indeed, this week, I know very well that we have developed Africa Climate Strategy together with the African Union. It has been going through the Committee of Ministers, and eventually will go to the heads of state to be addressed at the summit. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Frank, for that. I think the message to members of Parliament that this is doable, but we work with the African Union. And I think that if you do press that such an audience where these things could be discussed, I think an arrangement can be made between ECA and the African Union. But I think the route that we work with, because it's heads of states, it has to be through the African Union. I don't know if there is a question. We do have about 5 minutes to go, and I would appreciate if anyone wants to speak, please. You have the opportunity. Honorable Speaker from Namibia, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we do have a national committee for the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. That committee is coordinated by our National Planning Commission, a body that oversees the overall planning. And but of late, we felt that the role of Parliament must also become much more visible. And for that reason, we have felt it important to explore other ways and means of strengthening the role of Parliament in monitoring and to do the necessary follow-up with respect to the implementation of MDGs. So we are in the process of actually setting up a kind of what I would like to call a forum that consists of all chairpersons or the various standing committees to come together from time to time to reflect on the implementation of SDGs, and as our own ways of actually coming to terms with the need to do the necessary follow-up. So that is a system that is in making, and we feel that will allow the parliament to play its part. So that is as far as I can comment on that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker of National Assembly of Namibia, for those remarks. And I guess perhaps the question that came from Burundi, you can have a bilateral discussion to have an in-depth discussion on some of the issues that were raised, and maybe seek further clarification on that. I'm informed there is the two more speakers. I'm mindful of the time. Probably I'll give them a minute each before we close. There is the Honorable Ashantu Dahiru Mohammed and Honorable Innocent Yabisi Kabara also would like to have the floor. So, Honorable Ahmed, please could you go ahead? I can see you on the screen. Please unmute yourself. You have the button on the right bottom. Request to speak, please. Honorable Ahmed. Can we get Honorable Charles Chishimba to also to speak instead? Honorable Chishimba, please go ahead. I could see you on the screen. Honorable Chishimba.
Hello. Hello, I'm the Distinguished Senator Aisha Ahmed.
Oh, please go ahead.
You gave me the floor to speak, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
I just want to strengthen the relationship between the Nigerian Parliament and the executive in addressing the challenges created by the COVID lately. The government of Nigeria has come up with several initiatives to address the crisis preparedness, and such as boosting increased food production, and in the areas of health, education, and child mortality, rural water supply, and so on. And because I have just 1 minute to speak on, the National Assembly has approved millions of dollars to be disbursed by the government as a start of fund to support the medium and the small-scale enterprises and agri-businesses. Such funds are called survival funds, which is up to about 156 million US dollars. That's about 75 billion naira. And AGMIS, that's Agri-Business Small and Medium Investment Scheme, which is about 104 million US dollars, about 50 billion naira. And furthermore, the Nigerian National Assembly is contemplating providing legal backing for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals project to the mainline government agencies and departments, so as a means of ensuring sustainability, in addition to what we have now on ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator from Nigeria, for those very useful intervention. As we go towards the close, I'll be asking members of Parliament, please, to put your screens, your videos on. We will be taking a photograph together. So as we do that, so as we open your videos, I would like to ask Honorable Chishimba to come in as well. Honorable Chishimba. We also have Honorable Yabise Kabara to also come in if Honorable Chishimba is not ready. And in the meantime, I'm asking your honorable members of Parliament, please, to put on your videos so that our communication team can take a photograph, including the presenters, please. Honorable Chishimba, please go ahead. Go ahead, Honorable Chishimba.
Are you able to hear me, sir?
We can hear you, sir.
Yes, sir. I was saying that, okay, sir. I was saying that I'm not a member of Parliament. I am a staff of Parliament, but a desk officer for the caucus the Parliamentary Caucus on Sustainable Development Goals. The two honorable members, Dr. Kalila and Princess Kasune, I'm not sure whether they have been able to log in. But coming from the Parliament of Zambia and being a desk officer of the Parliamentary Caucus on SDGs, apparently we don't seem to have a committee in Parliament that superintends over the implementation of the SDGs. But the caucus is a voluntary organization which may not exert so much influence and oversight over the executive. And what is being pushed now is to have a committee established, because the committee has the power to superintend over the activities of the executive. A parliamentary caucus, which is just a voluntary organization, may not have that power. So the push now is to actually have a committee of parliament designated specifically to look at how government is implementing these SDGs. From the government side, there are SDGs scattered in different ministries, and each ministry may be dealing with one or two. And yet we need an organization that should be able to coordinate all the activities so that they are all pulling in one direction. I just thought maybe I should indicate that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That was very useful, Mr. Chishimba. And yes, Honorable Kasune Mzulu was connected. I also want to believe the other member of parliament who was also connected. She made an intervention, Honorable Kasune Zulu. So, members of parliament, we are coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we are coming to a close of this session. The time that is allocated, and I just want to catch up on a few points that I can recall having raised by a number of you, starting from the Secretary General. And as I do that, please do put your videos so that we can have a photograph of it. So I think this session really has been very rich, in an indication that there's so much that is going on across the continent, and that the onus really is on the members of parliament to see how we can implement the SDGs in the light of COVID and also post-COVID. The issues of climate change, how much they actually impact on our economies. And also the CFTA, how it can be a very good driver in pushing the economies across the continent. So we heard across that members of parliament are being called in the role to look at an oversight on the budgets, policy implementation, and also reinforcing of the commitment that is made on SDGs. The issue about data, which was very clear in terms of availability, that data is still very weak. And again, we heard from a number of you that this is an area that you have concern of, and I think that would be important to put a little bit of our resources in there. Emphasis that was made on the youth equally, that them finding themselves, most of them unemployed, and if they are perhaps in the informal sector. Zimbabwe raised quite a number of challenges on SDGs around healthy financial issues, and also the actions that are being taken by the statutory instruments to manage the COVID in the country. But technology also matched up quite strongly in terms of adoption and also renewable energy uptake, which was very critical. Chad also raised some very interesting issues in terms of the budget and social measures to respond to the crisis, and the committees that are being put in place, and of course the challenges that every other country is facing. Zimbabwe, also talked about issues of budget, the collaboration with the international cooperation partners, and also the deployment of the National Development Plan itself and aligning it to the SDGs. Namibia rather raised also very, very important issues by the speaker himself. The issue of emphasizing the importance of data, I think that was really appreciated. And also we heard from the various presenters, particularly the last two presenters that talked about climate change and CFTA. And all these members of parliament, we are going to put these notes together and send them over to you, and you share for your own comments. I believe this is not the end of this conversation with yourselves. There will be another opportunity where we can actually take forward. I think we heard from Zambia, the member of parliament from Zambia was talking about, can we have a much deeper discussion on climate change? This is very important.
It looks like we lost the...
Did we?
The moderator.
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Bart, very well. Can you see me wave my hand? I think everyone else
Can you
is
hear
able
me?
to hear me. I can hear you, but perhaps it's there, that side. David can hear me too. He's waving at me. And Nigeria, the senator, is also waving at me. So, yeah, so I was making just final remarks.
No voice.
Low voice, perhaps. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Well,
yes, they're able to hear me.
I think at this stage
I
we
can hear you
conclude.
loud and clear.
But
no,
but they can hear me. They can hear me, but. Hello, Bart, can you hear me now? Yeah, so I think it's only Bart is not hearing me. So I want to thank you, members of parliament, the senator and colleagues that really made very splendid presentations. I think as ECA, we will stand ready to continue to support member countries in the areas that were mentioned around SDGs, climate change efforts and the CFTA. This is a part of our core business, and we want to see how we can do this going further. So once again, to thank you, the Secretary General who made time to be with us, and various members of parliament and here. I just want to wish you a very, very good afternoon and good evening for some of you, and hope to have another opportunity to discuss. And finally, I will ask that you do look at the evaluation form that's going to be sent to you, please, to complete, and that will be able to help us actually going forward in terms of how we plan the subsequent meetings.
Well, I don't know if you hear me, but I think we will all agree that we've had a very fruitful discussion on the role of parliamentarians in addressing and supporting the implementation of the SDGs. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your contributions, which we will collate and use to inform our work going forward. We hope that this is the beginning of a conversation, not just an event that, but more of a relationship that we're going to build as ECA with parliamentarians as we move forward towards the implementation of the SDGs. So on behalf of the moderator and on behalf of the Executive Secretary, I'd like to thank you all for your participation and to bring this event to a close. Thank you again, and we wish you the best of the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just realized my mic was turned off.